Welcome back to Jesus Talks 365. Thank you guys for tuning in again. And thank you guys for I got a lot of good messages recently, and we thank you guys for that. It's truly meant a lot. But today, Trey is going to introduce the topic since it was his idea.
So for today, we're just talking about how, your relationship, we're going to talk about how your relationship with God isn't a straight line. And, it's complicated to handle sometimes. And, it's something that, no matter where you are in your journey with God, that, you'll struggle with at some point. So we just really wanted to kind of highlight, that journey itself and how to approach it.
Right. The up and downs are normal. We want to let you know that you're not alone in that. But yeah, we're going to get in that today. Thank you guys for watching. Yeah, that's the intro. Yeah, welcome. We appreciate you guys tuning in. Couple distractions today, but we're locked in on the Lord. So as Trey said, we're going to talk about how your faith journey is not going to be just a straight line up. And it's going to be up and down, hills, valleys, all the up and downs in between. So Trey, go ahead and start us off. Give us a little word from the Lord.
Well, we don't have much word from the Lord today.
The
word is coming from the Lord, but it's not from His book. It's more just like a conversation. It's kind of the focus today. But the way this topic came up is that me and Hayden, we were just talking about some of the stuff we've been going through in our lives recently, and how we've kind of came to this conclusion that your relationship with God isn't as simple as it might seem sometimes. It doesn't really matter what stage you are in your relationship with God. It's just one of those things to where you're gonna have your positives and your negatives, and you gotta be able to ride the highs with the lows. And it's something. It actually reminds me a lot of, for those who have had to go through the rehab process with injuries and whatnot. It reminds me a lot of that, because I remember as I was going through my process, I had a lot of physical therapists and whatnot, and they were just telling me hey, you're gonna have good days, and when you have those good days, it's a great thing to celebrate them. But you're also gonna have your bad days, and even when you do have those step backs, it's really important how you respond. And so that same thing applies to our faith, because it's easy, just be all sunshine and rainbows when things are going our way and we feel really connected with God. But when we do feel kind of out of tune, how do we lock back in per se?
Right. And I'm actually going to read Romans 7:14 throughout Romans 7. So it might be a second, but it is truly a good verse. To give some background, this is Paul. Paul is one of the disciples of Jesus. Truly, he's a man you want to live your life like. That's not Jesus, of course. He's a person to be a role model in one's life. Do you know what I mean? He's one of the most profound people in the Bible. He's lived his life for Christ. He was persecuted. He died for his faith. Great guy. And even then, he admits that there's been times where he can't seem to get it right and he doesn't understand. That his faith was up and down. So, because Trey is better at reading than I am, because I read too fast.
Put the liberal arts education to use.
Right. So Trey goes to a school for English.
So what verses do you
just
want
go
to
through
read?
7. You'll read what you'll figure out what it's saying.
Okay. We know that the law is spiritual, but I am unspiritual, sold as a slave to sin. I do not understand what I do, for what I want to do, I do not do, but what I hate to do, I do. And if I do what I do, not what to do, I agree that the law is good. As it is no longer I myself who do it, but it is sin living in me. For I know that good itself does not dwell in me, that is, in my sinful nature. For I have the desire to do what is good, but I cannot carry it out. For I do not do the good I want to do, but the evil I do not want to do. This I keep on doing. Now if I do what I do not want to do, it is no longer I who do it, but it is sin living in me that does it. So I find this law at work. Although I want to do good, evil is right there with me. For in my inner being I delight in God's law, but I see another law at work in me, waging war against the law of my mind and making me a prisoner of the law of sin at work within me. What a wretched man I am. Who will rescue me from this body that is subject to death? Thanks be to God who delivers me through Jesus Christ our Lord. So then I myself in my mind am a slave to God's law, but in my sinful nature a slave to the law of sin. I will say it was worded a little tricky. I'll give you credit. It was worded a little tricky.
It's
like a tongue twister.
It's so true though. For I do what I don't want to do, but what I want to do I can't do it.
I really liked how it talked about kind of that internal battle that goes on. You know, we every day when we wake up, we have, you know, we're not going to be perfect, but nonetheless, we have choices to make on whether we want to do right or bad. And we know the difference between, you know, each of those results. So, you know, in everything you do, it is truly an active decision of, you know, continuing to put God first. And even if it doesn't come out in your actions, something I found really prominent lately is it matters just as much if it's in your thoughts.
Yeah.
Like, it's easy for me to be like, okay, well, you know, I didn't go do this, or, you know, I kept my mouth closed, this is that, whatever. But nonetheless, as you continue to grow in your faith, the thought itself starts to attach itself to you too, which is something that's really hard to shake, especially, honestly, it doesn't matter where you are, just in general. You know, it's something that as you go throughout this process, you'll struggle with. And, you know, it's hard. It is. You got to, you know, you don't necessarily always have the answer for it. You know, I feel like I'm kind of in that right now. To where, like, on paper, I'm doing things right. And, you know, on the outside, you know, it looks like, hey, he's got his life together. But for whatever reason, like, internally, especially the past 2 weeks, I've just been feeling like I'm really, like, at a battle with myself.
Right.
You know, it's hard to kind of find that grace that was really easy to find for a long time. And that's part of why it's so important that you continue to remain proactive in your faith as well. Because things like this, for example, like, yeah, like I'm hoping that, you know, this resonates with somebody else, but like I need this too. Mm-hmm. You know, this isn't just about, you know, hey, put it out there, see what happens. Like, it is, but at the same time, you know, this is almost therapeutic for me and Hayden as well, because we still face these same issues that we talk about, and we don't have the answers to all of them. That's part of why it's so important that you do talk about them, so you can, you know, just kind of figure it out on your own.
And through other people. Like, I think we all have different experiences and different knowledge given to us by God. But as we were talking about before, I think God judges based on the intent of the heart. So yes, it is a great first step to slow down the actions of sin. It slows down a lot of the repercussions, and because, like, even though God's grace covers all sin is covered by God's grace. God's grace will forever outweigh the sin in the world. That doesn't stop the consequences from our sin. They're still there. Things will still happen because you sinned, even though it's still forgiven. And because of that, you know, I feel like a lot of times we get so caught up in stopping the action, we forget that what the root cause of it is. And that's is that the root causes of our sin starts in our mind. And so learning to control that and learning to when you start going towards the root is how you're going to start finding true change in the actions.
You know how, you know, when we talk about God, it's like we're connected to Him, like He's the branch or something like that.
Well, he's the tree, we're the branch.
He's the tree. Yes. So God's the tree, right? Sin is a weed. That's essentially what it is. You know, these weeds, weeds, they pop up all the time, and yeah, you can pull them out. You can do whatever, or you can like spray pesticide on it, or you could choose to ignore it. However you approach it, but nonetheless, you know, they're gonna keep coming back unless you fully address the problem.
Right.
Me picking one weed doesn't do anything about the 10 other weeds that are sitting in my yard. You know, you have to make the decision to just...
You got to uproot the weed.
Yes, you got to uproot it. You know, you got to pull it from the root, and you can't give it any chance to come back, you know?
Right.
And it's hard because trying to eliminate that weed, that sin, you know, but it's something that you really it's attention to detail is necessary when it comes to it.
Right.
Because it's easy to miss one weed, and then next thing you know, all these other ones pop up because you didn't get all of it.
So I always think of that, going back to the verse we read in Romans, is that we are not expected to be perfect. God does not expect us to be perfect. Perfection is not in any way what we're expected to achieve. In fact, that it talks about this in Romans, that the law, that God's commandments were set in place to lead us to life, but because of our sin, it leads us to death because we can never achieve it. So God does not expect perfection, but what He expects is what happens, your reaction to your imperfection. So when you cross that line, when you sin, when you fall short, is your instant response to fall farther away, to continue to dwell on it, or get back on track?
You know, kind of piggybacking off of what Hayden just said, you know, we're all sinners. We are. We're sinful by nature, which is the unfortunate situation that we found ourselves in. But nonetheless, like, we're all sinners. We all have our imperfections. We all have our wrongs. But, you know, our sin isn't what defines us. Right. What defines us is how we respond and address that sin. Because if you're content with your sin and you don't have a problem with it, or you choose to just live with it and not let it bother you, you know, you're okay with it, that's a problem. Because then you allow that all that negativity and you allow the enemy to win, essentially.
Well, think about this. Think about if sin did define you. If you were defined by your mistakes, you were defined by your decisions, think about how messed up of a person we'd all be. How imperfect we are. Like all the daily, even the small sins that we go out through the day will pile up. Those big sins in our life, those big mistakes in our life, if they defined us and they held on to us, how broken would we feel? How nasty would we feel? Because sin adds baggage to our life. It adds weight to our shoulders, but God's forgiveness is what takes it off. And if we expected, even though we found Christ, that we're still not going to sin. Because when we sin, it's literally an invitation for the devil to be proactive in our life. And that's how I've always looked at it, is that the more you sin, the more you're inviting evil into your life, whether you realize it or not. But back on topic, is we have to have comfort that salvation is still at work. That even though you found Christ, and a lot of us, if you're taking steps in your faith and you're finding Christ more and you fall short, I tend to find myself more frustrated because it's like, I should know better than this now. Like, oh, I've came so far and now I'm taking steps back. Or like as Jesus, one of the parables Jesus said was, you don't put wine in an old wine cloth. Like you don't go back to what you originally were using, you originally acting like. You need to push forward and find something new and transform. And so I think about that and it's like, I'm falling back. I'm mad at myself because I feel like I should know better than what I'm acting like at the moment. I feel like I should be living a life that's different. And this is a sin that I thought I defeated and now it's coming back. It's like, what is the problem? And I had a good talk with a buddy, Tyler, and he reminded me is that salvation is still at work. Like Jesus says that the sanctification process is from now until till death, right? Like it doesn't stop. God is constantly trying to change you, improve you, and help you because we are bound to sin whether we accept it or not. Like our flesh is innately sinful, right? We're bound on earth where imperfection thrives and we're going to sin. And because of that, we can't expect perfection. You can always try to push forward to be better, but if we expect perfection of ourselves, all it's gonna do is build shame up on our shoulders and weigh us down. And that's something that I'm starting to come to terms with is you have this like little honeymoon period is like what to call it when you start becoming a Christian, right? You like first there's like this month where you're like filled so much with the Holy Spirit, so new, you're living life great, right? You're not struggling with anything, but when that sort of feeling and that motivation almost and that passion kind of slowly dwindles away, that's the moment when you're like, okay, what do I do now? Because like beforehand, like, oh, I had so much, like I would look forward to reading the Bible, but now I just don't feel like it. I don't feel like so into it. Like, what do you happen? And when, like we said earlier, it's our faith is not just going to be a straight line up. It's going to have its hills. It's going to have its valleys. But I think the response aspect is what God looks at. Is, okay, you've fallen short. Okay, you don't feel my presence necessarily right now. Okay, you don't have the same passion or motivation you had in the past. What's your response to it? Is your response to be okay and accept it and move on, or is it to okay, I want to running back to the Lord?
When you're in the valley, you turn to God just as if you're still on the mountain,
and vice versa. If you turn to God when you were at your lowest, and now God's brought you out of it, do you just get distracted and push Him away again? It's all it's all based on, I feel like, the intent of the heart, and that's what God judges based off. So, like we were saying earlier with our thoughts. If your heart hasn't changed, just your actions, God realizes there's still an issue inside of you because eventually your heart's going to flow out. Like even though you might have stopped this action for a week, stopped your actions for a month, and you thought you had changed because your actions stopped, but deep down your heart hasn't changed. And that's what God chases after, right? And so He knows that. And so when you fall short as you're going down your path, you got to look back and see how far you've came and realize this is just a small setback that the devil's trying to put in your way, and you got to grow past that. And you also have to remember that salvation is not just, forgiveness is not just for those who haven't found Christ. It's those who have found Christ as well. Like, just because you know who God is doesn't mean you're absence of sin and imperfection. Like, yeah, you're going to fall short, so you need to accept the forgiveness that God's offered you. And that's what I found myself having a hard time with this, because I put so much pressure on my shoulders to be the perfect role model, to be the perfect person, because I feel like now I've been outwards about my faith. Now I have to start being perfect. Like, I can't set a bad example for those trying to find their faith. And you put this weight on your shoulders, and all it does is bear you down almost and slow down your growth in faith, or your growth in faith. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And, I think that your relationship with God can be compared, it can be compared to a flower, honestly. When you start off, you're very,
Can I jump in?
Yes.
Or do you know where you're going?
Well, I know where I'm going, but I mean, you can say
I like a tree. Think about the tree
Uh-huh.
because of the seasons.
Uh-huh.
You have times where you're blooming, you're prospering. It's like it's easy to love God. And then you have times where it kind of goes cold and you're like, okay, I kind of have this like stagnant moment. Like, okay, I miss when I was just full of passion and motivation.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the thing is, if you really in that moment, you're like, oh my gosh, I really don't understand why I don't have motivation to do this. And you come running towards God. If that's your initial reaction is to run towards God, his presence will come back. I think that a lot of times we get so caught up and we just start doing stuff through the motions. But it's like, oh, God's not bringing his presence, so therefore I can't. And this applies the same for when we sin. If you run towards God, change, growth, his presence will come back. And so I'm sorry for interrupting.
That's basically the same thing I was going to go down, except for a tree is even better comparison. And think of it this way, when you go through those hard times where, it's cold and it's rainy and you're losing, you feel like you're losing yourself, that's when you develop your community. So that's when you have to truly find out who you are, and you spread those seeds of God's love, and then the next thing you know, you turn around and you're not the only tree there anymore.
Amen, brother.
That was a bar.
I love that. It's just the fact that it's we can't expect this perfect straight line, and I think that's what we're trying to talk about today. Because as Paul said in Romans, it's a war. It's a daily war because our flesh itself is bound to sin. It's bound to be selfish desires, whatever is best for us, whatever feels good in that moment, temporary. Because like we've talked about this, right? Our flesh is temporary, so therefore it's going to crave temporary things, but your soul's eternal.
Yeah, see, we're locked. We're locked.
This is one of our favorite things we've talked about, I think. And that's why our soul knows we need God. Our soul is built for a relationship. Our flesh means nothing. When we die, our flesh stays here on earth. So it has no connection in the aspect of needing God, right? It's just trying to gratify itself here on earth. But our soul is what's important. The difference is our soul is, it will thrive as we live on earth and through eternity. So therefore, it's going to crave what's going to benefit it through eternity. So what our soul was created for relationship with God. It was created to be with God and in partnership with God and to live a life that honors God, because it honestly does a lot of things that we don't even see. A lot of the spiritual aspect of things we don't even understand, how our emotions can connect and how we need God and a variety of different things. But the point is it was created to live the life of how God created us to be. And you have a choice, though. It is a daily thing. It's a war. It's a daily thing. So you have to choose.
It's a daily battle.
It is a daily battle.
And, you're going to win some battles. You're going to lose some battles. But nonetheless,
you got to win the war.
Boom.
You got to win the war. You have to have the war in mind, the end in mind. The end in mind, if you're fighting a war, for example, and you lose a battle, you don't say, I'll lose a couple more and then I'll just get back on track later. No, your immediate reaction is, okay, now I've got to regain the ground that I lost. Mm-hmm. It's the same with our faith, that we continue to be content in the loss, content in the distance and the fading away from Christ and our intentionality and the path that God put us on. If you become content and then you become blind to your sin in that aspect, then you will the ground you start losing starts becoming more and more, even if you don't even realize it. And I think that goes back to the intent, is that when you lose that battle, even though you didn't intend to, when you lose that battle, you have to immediately chase after God and try to gain that ground back.
I think that, if there's anything that y'all take away from today, it's that, regardless of the ups and the downs, you got to fall in love with the process of pursuing God. That just continuing to strive for him regardless of what's going on, internally with you, with your soul or around you, regardless of the battle that you're having, just continuing to pursue him and falling in love with that process, understanding that, those struggles you have now, that's only going to strengthen your relationship with him. And that's why they're so important. So embrace it.
The best thing I think that sums it all up, in my opinion, in sin in general, when I think about it, is people ask, okay, what do I do when this happens? Or what do I do when this happens? And just chase God with all your might. If you're chasing God with all your might, it'll all work itself out. Because the intentionality behind it is to get to know God, and become closer to God, and to live for God and through God, or God to live through you. I think that a lot of times we get caught up in, okay, this exact sin, I need to stop this exact sin and this, and you get caught up in all these little things where if you just chase God,
the rest will take care of itself.
And you're going in that right direction. When you stop worrying about the footsteps in front of you, you stop worrying about the little creases and curves in the pathway. We're just like, I just want to chase God. that's honestly, in my opinion, one of the biggest ways that we just see growth is we just stop forgetting about all these small things. And if your intention is to chase God, to get as close as you can, have God fill us up, all those small things will be revealed to us. It'll show us. We'll be able to achieve those things in those aspects. Yeah, but I just think that this is the fact that God is good, and that we chase after God, it'll come into play, and our life will be taken care of. If that's your goal, to chase after God, therefore the steps that takes to go in that place, it'll all fall into place. So we thank you guys for listening, and we challenge you guys this week. I think this is one of the things our goal was, to help people find Christ and to realize the greatness and the goodness of God. So we're going to challenge you guys this week as you go out through the day. Think constantly, am I chasing Christ? Is my actions chase Christ? Does it reflect that? Am I putting the effort towards that? Because like a big thing for me is I used to love napping. I used to love just laying around, and I've realized it's a loss of time for me. Like that was time I was losing on getting to know God or being productive. So in that time where you're sitting on TikTok for 3 hours or taking a 4-hour nap like I used to, try to replace part of it and just learn to chase God, get to know God a little bit, and you'll see massive steps in your faith when you learn to chase God.
Amen.
All right, so that'll wrap it up. Thank you guys for listening again. We appreciate your support, and yeah, see you next time.